Good morning. All right, can you hear me? Can we go up just a little bit? All right, thank you very much. Well, look, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this first event of a great couple of days. My name's Robert Edmonson, and I am the new Commandant of the United States Army Signal School. And what better way, I think, to kick off a cyber-focused TechNet event to talk about Signal, but by way of a former infantry officer to go ahead and try to blend all of that together for you. So look, I've got two focuses here. I want to give you my two outcomes. The first outcome is that the folks that have done such a great job over the last 2 months, and yesterday was my anniversary, but those folks that have done such a great job over the last 2 months of bringing me on board as the new Commandant of the United States Army Signal School, I want to make sure that I regurgitate a little bit back to you to let you know that I'm actually listening and I'm retaining. And how else could you possibly move forward if you were not listening to people around you that give you great and wonderful advice? The second outcome that I'd like to provide you with is, which will probably be captured a little bit throughout my short presentation. There's only about 4 or 5 slides here, which will be the very last slide. And in that very last slide, you'll see focus areas, if you will. I'm not going to call them lines of effort right now, and I'm not going to call them priorities just yet. But in terms of full transparency, what is a person who's come into the United States Army Signal School, who served at the tactical level primarily, has served operational, has been at the strategic level in the Joint Staff, and is now at the institution, how's that person think? And what is it that I might be spending a little bit of extra time on as we begin to think more about what happens inside the Signal School and what happens outside the Signal School. So with that, next slide, please. All right. This slide right here is designed to let you know that I've got 2 hats. One is as the Commandant of the United States Army Signal School, and you can read some of the responsibilities along the left-hand side. Train, educate, and develop signal soldiers and leaders. And that's primarily focused at Fort Gordon and the 15th Signal Brigade, an element at Fort Meade, and another element out at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. That is the primary role, if you will, of the Commandant of the United States Army Signal School. But I wear 2 hats. So the first hat, primarily, as I said, is training, you could say, a bit of down and in. The second hat, as the Chief of Signal, is focused more so up and out. And that's where the engagement with the rest of the regiment by way of the rest of the Army comes in. So I almost like to think of this as an opportunity to leave Fort Gordon, go TDY, go visit JRTC, NTC unit commanders, and talk to them about how our Signal folks are doing out there, and then bringing those lessons learned back to the Signal School, or in fact, asking myself before I even leave, what are we training on at Fort Gordon, Georgia? What are we training on in the United States Army Signal School? And then making the trip out to, again, the operational force and to assess and get a snapshot of how well we're actually accomplishing that mission. One would almost argue that if you are looking at one area and not the other, you could lose sight. You could be the Chief of Signal and have great and wonderful ideas, but you're never thinking about the Commandant of the Signal School and how are you going to implement what it is that you're thinking about. Or to flip it around, you could be so focused at what you're teaching and what you're instructing that you're not thinking about the rest of the story, which I think can be gathered through the responsibilities as the Chief of Signal, and how are you going to maybe think a little bit differently as time goes forward. A POI, program of instruction, is great. However, we've got to make sure that it's relevant along the way, if that makes a little bit of sense to you. So those are the 2 hats. A great and wonderful job, honored to be in it, and happy that you're here with us this morning. Next slide, please. Okay, first piece up, Commandant of the Signal School. That just gives you an idea of how easy it could be for one individual to remain focused in solely on the Commandant of the Signal School and not look up and out at the other things that are happening. 7,000 students so far, over 11,000 students annually we train, approximately 3,000 in class today. And if you look across, you will then see warrant officers, non-commissioned officers, all are a part of the total number of classes that we teach at Fort Gordon. I'd like to fast forward down to the active guard and reserve piece for you. All of the training that we conduct at Fort Gordon is active, guard, and reserve based. We will not put a class together without reaching in and considering the active, the guard, as well as the reserve, and not just the active component. That can be a delicate balance because we all know that not everyone is on duty 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. But that we have to be smart, especially when it comes to technology. We have to be smart in how we're going to create the class, the instruction that's going to be used by not only the active, but the guard and the reserve as well. Next slide, please. Okay. Now I'm going to shift a little bit. I'm going to talk about preparing for tomorrow. So I've kind of set up that I'm the Commandant of the United States Army Signal School, fortunate enough to have that assignment. But I also want to make sure that in that capacity, whatever we're doing, whatever we're saying, whatever we're thinking about, we are in fact preparing for tomorrow, while you do keep in mind that there might be 3,000 students in class today. Now, this chart right here, this is one of my 3 remaining charts that I've used over the last 60 days or so to begin to get my mind around what I believe those responsibilities are that the Army has allowed me to take on in this capacity. So if you were to divide that slide in half, that chart in half, you've got the left-hand portion of the chart and you've got the right-hand portion of the chart. The left-hand portion of the chart, I think, is extremely important in understanding where we are today. As no one can predict the future, the best representative of how you can predict the future is to really know your past. So what did we have before the events of 9/11? And we all just heard upstairs that over the last 15 or 16 years, the nature of combat that we've been involved in has been just a little bit different. But I'll go back even further than that. And I'll submit to you that the 10 years prior to 9/11, we had a force that trained on a very regular basis. And all leaders up and down the chain of command understood troop leading procedures and maintenance management and all those other sorts of things. We were very well educated at how to conduct operations, so that when the no-notice call came on or about 9/11, when the no-notice call came, it was very easy for us to take small groups of strategic sergeants and outstanding lieutenants and captains and deploy them overseas. And that's what we did. And then we had the R4 model that allowed us to sustain that, and that was the right model at the right time. Now, of course, as you look down from the R4 model, you'll begin to see that the type of environment that we had, and just put your technology hat on. Large unit deployments, which meant that it was very easy to talk to the person that was in the tower in charge. Known locations you were going to. Some actually deployed back and forth to the same location they had occupied in theater, only with maybe a promotion or 2 under their belt. With the same piece of equipment, perhaps. There was an established infrastructure over the course of time that we were able to build up and leverage, which, of course, if it's established, there might be less maintenance that needs to be done because it's steady-state operations. Troubleshooting, we figured out in the very beginning how to install that infrastructure downrange, and over the course of time, the mission was, don't break it. Keep it green. As green as it was the last time you were here. There was a limited cyber threat. We didn't have equipment moving back and forth. That's the LBE, TPE. And there was much greater certainty in the world, in the soldier's life. You knew where you were in your cycle. The Army knew where you were in your cycle. You were manned, trained, and equipped using the R4 model to meet that mission as it was known at that time. And again, that was exactly what we needed. Now let's move from left to right. At the top of the chart, we began the conflict with mobile subscriber equipment. We then went into WinT Inc. 1 and now WinT Inc. 2 over the course. And what has also happened is the world has now become a bit more unpredictable than it was. So I know that we've heard that a lot. We've heard about how things are unpredictable. You can see that there's the Army operating concept, win in a complex world, that's been used as a document for us to help calibrate our thinking as far as how we're going to move forward. What I'd like to offer to you is the bottom right-hand box. And this is not only for students that I see here, instructors, folks from industry and other partners. The difference between what we fielded, what we taught, and how we taught it years ago from left to right is that right about now we need to get back to understanding small unit deployments. The next conflict that comes, and I have no intel in on where that might be, will probably be to a place that we cannot spell. You can't point to it on a map, and you're going to send a very small group of folks there first. Unknown locations. I highly doubt there's going to be an infrastructure. We cannot rely upon that. So what is the infrastructure that we, the Signal Corps, are going to bring to the next engagement? The maintenance piece, again, where we have not had to concern ourselves with that, at this point, whatever piece of equipment we field, whatever we take down range, we have to understand how to keep it alive in an austere environment. And troubleshooting. Again, through 10 plus years of knowing the environment, knowing the infrastructure, knowing the locations, there's been a reduced necessity to troubleshoot your own equipment along the way. So we do need something that's a bit more simple. Unit training is more imperative now than before. There's naturally an increased cyber threat. Some have argued that in 1990, one of the best, worst things that we did was that we defeated Saddam Hussein so rapidly in about 100 hours. It's the best because it was over rapidly. Some would argue that it created more challenges because we then taught our adversaries what not to do. Maybe we've done the same thing over the course of the last 15 years, is taught our adversaries what not to do. So they're going to adjust at the same time. And I would ask those, as we, again, trying to get my mind around this, the new position here, to think about what we do, and not only think about it from the perspective of you enabling it, or you installing it, or you owning it, but you leading it, and you understanding that there might be a threat that's out there that's looking to slow you down just a little bit. If I know what you're good at, then I'm probably going to go after what you're good at if I can, without you knowing about it. Limited LPE, TPE, what we have as a regiment on the base post camps and stations is what we're going to take with us. There's going to be not that many units on the other side that are going to be able to transition equipment from them to you. Even more imperative in the way that we teach at Fort Gordon and the way that we teach at the units. Again, the dual hat role piece that I mentioned a little bit earlier. Now, the pre-command course, I'd like to give you this, and then I'll move on to the next slide. The pre-command course, which obviously will take a great deal of direction from the Chief of Staff of the Army, as well as the Combined Arms Center out at Leavenworth, is also re-looking the way in which the pre-command course is going to be instructed. Now, I'm not telling you that just to tell you that. I'm sharing that with you because I believe that to be a full reckoning that maybe some of the things that we've done over the past number of years that have satisfied the requirements over the past couple of years are going to have to change in order for us to continue to move forward. Recognizing that 82% of the individuals in the United States Army today on active duty came in the United States Army after 9/11. There's nothing wrong with that. It simply means that there's a high percentage of individuals who really understand R4Gen and RIP-TOA. And being totally transparent with you, I did not know what R4Gen or RIP-TOA was until I was a major in the United States Army. Now, I wanted to give that to you because I know a lot of folks talk about how we need to, move forward and forget the past. I don't want you to forget your past. I don't want you to forget R4Gen. I don't want you to forget RIP-TOA. I don't want you to forget LBE or TPE. But I want you to completely understand that I didn't know what any of those terms were until I was a major in the Army. And it's because we didn't use those terms in order to become an expeditionary formation that can go anywhere at any time and do anything. And that's what the Signal Corps has to be able to do. Anywhere, any place, any time. And you can do that, in my opinion, if you own it. You own the training, you own the maintenance, you own the leader development, you own the proponency. And if you understand that where we're going in the future is not where we've been in the past, then you'll be able to calibrate a little bit more quickly. But do not forget what you've experienced and what you've learned, because it took me 10 plus years of my career to spell R4Gen and rip TOA. Next slide, please. All right, second to the last slide. Opening the aperture. As I sit down and get updated on what we're teaching, where we're teaching it, where the priorities are, we often end up opening up the aperture in the discussion to try to meet the needs of the future. Arguably, the aperture, the primary focus, could have been a little bit more narrow because it simply needed to be a little bit more narrow over a period of time. But if you look at the far left and the far right of that chart, that will give you an idea as to where some of the questions and some of the discussion that is happening in and around the United States Army Signal School. So I'll take the far right first. Cyber defense capabilities. Currently, we've got 8 specialties in 32 different areas that are conducting training. That's a good news story. I would offer to you that we're actually looking for 9 specialties and 33 different classes to offer. Why would we want to entertain that discussion? This is not offensive cyber. This is not defensive cyber. I almost look at it in some of the discussions, and we've had some good professional debates back and forth, has been with regard to securing your own base, securing your own area that you own. Much like you have a padlock on your front door, a security system, perhaps a dog, a white picket fence, why not, I ask, secure yourself? If we plan it across the bottom of the screen, if we plan it and we build it, then why ought we not defend it? And I'm not talking about offense and defense. But what I am talking about is don't plan it and build it without an eye towards how you can defend it. Because I believe that you can defend your home better than I can defend your home. You know where your valuables are. You know where your refrigerator is. And if you know where certain things are inside your portion of the network, to include one point of presence, you know how the network was put together. You were a part of that network. You planned it. You built it. You installed it. Then you probably are the person that has the right type of mindset to defend your home better than I can defend your home, if that makes just a little bit of sense. So we are having several discussions about how to continue to open up that aperture and what it turns into, what we could perhaps be considering is more than IOM. I would argue maybe IOD. Once I've installed, once I've operated, why don't I then defend my portion of the network? So we're looking at the tools that could be at our fingertips and the aptitude associated with being able to bring those tools to bear when it comes to the installing of the network. The far left-hand side, the tip of the spear, I would argue that the most important formation in the United States Army is the BCT. Why does the Army exist? That's a rhetorical question, but why does the Army exist? And then the Army focuses on its brigade combat teams in order to complete the mission that is given to the Army from the Secretary of Defense and President of the United States. So if you accept that a brigade combat team is the most important formation in the United States Army to deter, fight, win, then what is our focus on the brigade combat team as a signal school? Now, I don't mean that from the standpoint of let's take the responsibility from other base post camps and stations and bring those responsibilities to Fort Gordon. That's not what I mean. But what I do mean is that we definitely have clear equities in what it is that the brigade combat teams are building, are considering, are manning, so that they can fight left to right, end to end in the gray area across the 3/4 of the way down the slide. If we're going to look end to end as a regiment, and we're going to look end to end as an army, then we probably ought to consider the tip of the spear, which might be somewhere around the brigade combat team or below. And to our industry partners, some of that means what is it that we're actually fielding to the brigades and to the companies and to the battalions. That the Battalion S6, the Battalion S6 team needs to make sure that it's considering along the way, far left, all the way to the far right, which is defending your portion of the network. Next slide, please. So, as we analyze the situation, take a look at the problem, try to determine how we're going to move forward, because nothing remains the same, we begin to do some analysis, and I'm just going to focus your attention to the right-hand portion of the slide under the personnel and the training piece for today, or at least for now. So what we're looking at is you got your 255 warrant officers and your 25 deltas. We are actively looking at how to grow that force, that is competent and grow it a little bit faster. But it has to remain competent, because if you grow something too fast, you might just find out that it's not as competent as you actually want it to be before we just rapid produce. So please know that's something that we're highly involved in. The 25 Gulf pilot course. The 25 Gulf pilot course is primarily designed to shore up some of the gaps that exist in the 25 Alpha officers' toolkit. And I'm telling you that, and I'm relaying that to you as a 25 Alpha. One of the best things the Army ever did was to make me uncomfortable in some of my assignments. And perhaps the number one assignment that made me uncomfortable was the assignment to INSCOM as the G6, which is the 24 position. To begin to learn something that's a little bit more than the tactical employment of. I would offer to you that while the tactical employment of is extremely important, what's equally important is for you to understand what it is that you're actually employing. It goes back to one of the pre-command course add-ons that's coming really soon. So the Bravo and the November, those are just two examples of of MOSs that we're considering to take a look at what defensive measures can you bring to the fight. We've asked you to install. We've asked you to operate for years, but the question becomes, and I'm not saying that we've got it right. I look forward to your input along the way. But the question is, what can you bring for your point of presence or that you're responsible for anyway? And then scanning tools. That almost dovetails into the Bravo and the Delta piece, to take a look at who's best suited out there at the edge of the network. And to use the previous slide as an example, the far left-hand portion of the slide, inside a brigade combat team, to perhaps take a look at their own local security before you get to offense and defense. Because again, if the BCT planned it and the BCT installed it, then they're probably best to go ahead and defend it as well. So understand that all of this analysis does take place over time. Nothing happens overnight. But as far as the end-to-end review goes, these are a couple of the areas that we're taking a look at. Next slide, please. Okay, my final chart for you. And this is the one that I've probably shared through a couple of emails with people along the way. First of all, if there's something on the slide that's not listed, that doesn't mean that it's not important. I'll just offer to you that if everything's important, then nothing's important. But there are a couple of areas that I'd like to draw your attention. And the first one is regimental readiness. Now, that's not readiness that is med-pros only and belongs outside of Fort Gordon. That is regimental readiness across the board. The personnel that we bring into the United States Army, we need to ensure that we've got folks that have the right aptitude, the right skill set, the right physical health to bring them into the Army so they can compete and with an adversary in a contested and congested environment on a battlefield that has yet to be determined. Training. I added the training piece in there, and I'm just being transparent with you now. I'm adding the training piece in there because the objective of the United States Army Signal School is not just to train people to graduate. We need to be able to train people to graduate and immediately become a combat multiplier inside your formations on day one. So we've got to have an eye towards providing the soldier to the unit upon graduation. And then equipment maintenance. Now, I'll share with you, as I shared with the majors at the Command and General Staff College just a couple of weeks ago, that if the fact that I'm talking about equipment maintenance right now makes you feel a little uneasy, or you're wondering why am I even having that conversation in the first place, I'd like to share with you that my boss, Lieutenant General, talked to me about maintenance. during our counseling session on behalf of the regiment. Signal maintenance, vehicle maintenance. The bottom line is, if you want to become an expeditionary formation, then you have to be able to own your own equipment and do your own maintenance. Otherwise, you're going to have the best equipment with the best soldiers and the best training inside a motor pool because it can't move. I'd like to offer that to you. Signal operations. The word operations is key. Leading operations, leading what it is that we do. It's not service provider. Had a boss years ago mention to me, actually it was several years ago, and he was a senior gentleman, and he heard one of us juniors talk about how we're providing a service to the customer. And he stopped us at our tracks. I didn't understand why he stopped us at our tracks at the time, but I actually get more of it now than I ever have before. We don't have customers. We lead and we provide a capability, and that capability needs to be on time and delivered in support of tactical operations, strategic operations, and all in between. But leading what it is that we do. And again, some of this is directly related to the Chief of Signal hat, and some of this is otherwise related to the Commandant's hat. But either way, I think we need to be able to lead operations. Signal support in support of cyber defense, you heard me say earlier, we plan it, we build it, so we ought to defend it. It makes logical sense. So I'm challenging folks right now that are in and around me to come up with a solution that helps us get after the recognition, unless they'd like to challenge, that we don't plan it and we don't build it, and therefore we don't defend it. So more to follow on that. Academic excellence. As time has gone by, we have fielded new capabilities, we've got new techniques, we've got new ways of doing business, and we need to make sure that we codify that inside the Army Signal School. It's very easy to continue to train on the equipment that you have, but we got to make sure that it's codified so the next group of leaders that comes in behind us are able to pick that up, and it'll be relevant and accurate across the board. World-class staff. My deputy, Mr. Williams, and I talk a lot about the world-class staff, and we are actively involved in looking for ways to enhance the cadre. Because as technology continues to advance over time, we have to be able to keep pace. And we got to have the best folks on the platform. That's in uniform and out of uniform, instructing that next generation of folks. And in the pre-command course, I already mentioned that to you a little bit earlier. All right, my last piece here, purpose. So, purpose, to me, combines both the Chief of Signal responsibility as well as the Commandant of the Signal School. Purpose. I would argue that over the course of time, if we've been falling in on the same infrastructure overseas, going to the same locations, you might, over the course, begin to forget what your purpose is. And this is a reminder to me and everyone around that our purpose, is to meet the needs of the Army. Our purpose is not for ourselves. Our purpose is not to install a network for ourselves. But our purpose is to meet those needs of the Army, and wherever those electrons and capabilities need to be pointed, that's what we've got to be able to understand. So we've got to align our core competencies to fall in on what are the needs of the Army today and what will the needs of the Army be in the very near future, because they may not be the needs of the past. Teaming, trust, and ownership. I highlight that only because in an expeditionary environment, you have no choice but to team, trust, and own your piece. And the last piece, and we've said it a couple of different times, is expeditionary operations. We've got to be prepared for the no-notice call. So the instructors, from the instructor at Fort Gordon all the way to the team chief halfway around the world or somewhere in between, I've asked a couple of instructors, if an individual graduates from the course today and the phone call comes in tonight, and that individual, that young trooper, is now going to get on a plane and fly away to do what it is that our nation has called them to do, are they prepared? And if they are, then great. And if they're not, then that's where we need to go ahead and adjust ourselves internal, because it's simply the right thing to do. So we don't graduate folks at the United States Army Signal School just to graduate them. we graduate them so that we can go ahead and add them to the operational force, and they can immediately become a combat multiplier. And with that, I'm going to open myself up to questions. Next slide, please. Questions? Either I made it extremely clear or extremely hazy. Go ahead, please. Let's get him we have a microphone, please.
Good morning, sir.
Hey, good morning, Chief.
My name is CW3 Reyna. I'm currently with TWI, General Dynamics, out in Taunton, Massachusetts. You talked about maintenance. Are we, and I'm coming back to be an instructor here, so hopefully I can bring some of what I'm doing over there and bring it back here. What I've noticed, I've been there since April, maintenance is a huge thing with Inc. 2. Mm-hmm. Okay? Are we embracing the 948s into this now? Because there seems like there's a clear line between a 255 and a 948, and I didn't see 25 uniforms up there, but we're putting a lot of emphasis at the BCT for a 25 uniform to do maintenance. Yeah. And when I get a young trooper coming in and they say, Chief, I don't know anything about maintenance, right, I have to get my 948s or my 94 series to do it. So are we trying to collaborate with them so that we know that it's a team effort and not a maintenance and a signal? Yeah. Chief, I'll be honest with you. At this point, the first question that I asked, that's a great one. I've got to take that one back. But here's what I have asked. What is the level? Let's talk about the 10-level maintenance that we're doing at Fort Gordon. We're almost beginning at that level right now. And you're absolutely right. I've got to go ahead, please take that down. I've got to go back and take a look and see how we're integrating with the higher level maintenance. But it begins with looking in-house. So the ownership piece that I mentioned to you, I've got to own it as well. What is it at the 10 level that we're teaching at Fort Gordon? And that was the question that came up. So we've got to take a look at that piece. We've got to, not only the 10-level maintenance, but the troubleshooting goes along with it. Because I would argue that if you're not troubleshooting, then you might not be doing 10-level maintenance either. They kind of work hand in hand. So what we are doing, though, is taking a look at some of the periods of instruction that we have right now. And we asked, how often is it that we train at the collective level? Because I would argue that if you train at the collective level, that's probably the point where you begin to find troubleshooting challenges and 10-level challenges. And if we're training at the individual level only and not paying enough attention to the collective level, we may be missing some of our responsibilities before we even get to the 948, if that makes sense. So, Chief, you are spot on. Maintenance management. As I walked into Brigade Command, folks like to tell every generation of folks something about themselves, right? So there's probably stereotypes about the E7s and stereotypes about the captains. Well, the stereotypes about the colonels when I went into Brigade Command was that you colonels do not know how to do maintenance management. And I'm bringing that back from Fort Leavenworth during a pre-command course. You colonels do not know how to do maintenance management. Now, where would that even come from? I'm not going to debate it either way. I'm going to state that that it's a reality that someone is thinking about. And if someone's thinking about it, then we probably ought to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, is there merit to that argument? Then the discussion got a little bit better. It became, here's why you soon-to-be brigade commanders are not good at maintenance management. It's because when you were battalion commanders, you were deployed. And because you were successful battalion commanders, upon redeployment, you then became the G3 or the CHOPS or the XO, or the Chief of Staff, and you were not doing maintenance. So perhaps, during my quick, humble tour of Brigade Command, we had a generation of folks that some knew maintenance management and some didn't. Top down, please understand that we're all taking a look at it. It's important. I'm going to start internal to the schoolhouse and ask ourselves, what are we doing at the 10 level? How are we troubleshooting? And when and where do we train at the collective level so that we can expose the gaps and seams if they do exist? Fair enough? All right.
Sir, I'm Captain Kyle Barrett. I'm one of your CCC SGLs. I met you last week.
Sure.
So I'm a Project Warrior officer. I just came from JMRC in Germany. And earlier on you talked about how you'll be engaging with the various CTCs, and that's part of your job as the Chief of Signal, also the Commandant. Guys like me, I just came from the CTC where I spent 2 years in the box watching good S6s and S6s that were struggling, and I have a lot of lessons learned from there. Is there a forum or a working group that I can be part of here at the CCC where I can engage those 30s from NTC, JRTC, JMRC so that we can have a dialogue on a regular basis moving forward?
Great question. First of all, how long have you been here? 3 months. Welcome. All right. It's been a little while since I heard about that program. I know that it was out there, but it's been a little while since I had met someone who had been through that program. And quite frankly, I think we're looking at bringing in someone else with your type of skill set to be one of your partners. So, to your question about what to do with all that information that you have and all those lessons learned, first of all, that's part of the reason that you're here. You can share that with your fellow Captain Career Course instructors along the way, and to include your seniors in the Signal Captain's Career Course. But here are two other areas. Number one is the lessons learned element that's at Fort Gordon in the CCOE. I'd like for you to make sure that you talk with the lessons learned folks about what it is that you've experienced over the course of time. That's number one. And number two is we have an S6 course. And I think that's another great area for you to be able to share and spend some time with and download some of that information. Now, when it comes to a forum, there's not a forum right now that exists to tease out that information. But I would offer to you that as we have the lessons learned discussion, that's a forum that I actually am spending some time in right now. I would ask you to go down and talk to lessons learned and then work with them and then come on into the office. Because we are having some of these discussions about what to do with the lessons learned. But I think the S6 course, the Captain's Career Course, and the lessons learned are three great places for you to start. Fair enough? All right. Yes?
Sir, you made some interesting comments about maintenance and your perspective that do your own maintenance is a requirement for success. Mm-hmm. And then with your remarks with regard to cybersecurity and cyber ops, I wonder if in your thinking that analogy applies to have your own capability at the tactical unit for cyberspace defense.
Okay. So if I want to make sure I understand the question correctly. I talked about maintenance and owning our piece of maintenance, and your question is cyber defense and maybe at the tactical edge owning cyber defense. I would offer that I don't believe that it's a binary choice. I don't believe that when it comes to cyberspace and the network and the defense of that piece, that one piece will exist without the other. It's almost like if I were to go back to my old infantry days, I think it's somewhere in FM 7-8, but don't quote me, but there's layered defense. And I think that there's an element of defensive operations that has to occur at the lower level. Again, not offense, not active defense, but ownership of your piece. And if you are aware of your neighborhood and you are aware of your, let's say, front yard, if you will, to use that as an example, then you are able to pick up the phone and dial 911 as an example when you've watched something happen in front of your home that you know is just not right. Thank you. Sir.
So good afternoon, or good morning. So I'm Charlie Mike. I work in the Signal School, and one of my jobs for the Signal Commandant is the training program manager. So one of the things I would ask you, sir, is you start talking about being able to deploy a soldier to an unknown destination. One of the things that, of course, you know that happens within the Signal School, you're always getting fielded equipment. The Chief Warrant Officer talked about WinT. We have, of course, snaps and grips. So what's your thought process or comments being able to make the training more complex, being able to bring those groups together to maybe think outside the box so that when they get there, they can have dialogue as far as what ifs per se, being able to make it more complex, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. Thank you for that question, too. My answer is multi-echelon training. And I kind of began to talk about that a little bit earlier when I referenced an MOS training, and at what point do we bring them all together? Multi-echelon training will teach so many things: maintenance, troubleshooting, teamwork, how the systems can function or not function with one another. So my answer to your question is a focus on multi-echelon collective training and finding that happy middle ground, if you will, because at the same time that I'll talk about the material that's on the slides, I'm also so much of a realist that we also understand we only have so much time, and that the Army nor any organization will hire you and bring you in and want to train you endlessly. At a certain point, we've got to all depart and get out to the unit. We've got to make sure that the baseline when they depart and get to the unit is at the right place. And perhaps one of the ways to get after a couple of the areas that have been mentioned here is through multi-echelon collective training. And perhaps then some of the maintenance challenges that we hear, troubleshooting challenges that we hear out there in the field, I'm sure that our Project Warrior would be able to give us some insight as to how well we troubleshoot and how long it takes a network to get installed in an expeditionary, austere environment, can be tied back to what's the level of multi-echelon collective training that we conduct, at least while you're with us for a period of time, and then to have that as a part of leader development that continues at the other installations once you've arrived. The network is complex. Everyone knows that. It's the integration of the network that becomes the greatest challenge. Complexity in and of itself is not enough. How do you integrate to provide the right effects, the right capabilities at the right time? And you probably would do better at that at the collective level than focus solely at the individual level. Understanding crawl, walk, run, though. So you got to crawl at the individual level first, but you got to be able to walk, and then you got to be able to run. Yes?
Sir, Master Sergeant Drager, Cyber Protection Brigade. Are there any plans in place to create sort of a feedback loop for the lessons we're learning from the Cyber Protection Brigade, the same mistakes we keep seeing over and over again? Mm-hmm. I'm speaking as someone that grew up as a 25 Bravo. I became very good at making the network work. However, I wasn't good at tuning the network, at securing the network, other than Telnet bad, SSH good. Mm-hmm. And because I was never taught those protective tasks. As you said, it was IOM, not IOMP. So are there plans to roll those protective tasks into the basic training, and then we make the network better, and then we find new protective tasks to make it even better and roll that in, create a feedback loop between signal and cyber?
So thanks for that question. So Master Sergeant, first of all, congratulations on an outstanding career. You're a Master Sergeant E8 in the United States Army. Very small percentage of folks have been able to get to that level, whether they stay for 20 years or even more than 20 years. And you mentioned that you grew up as a 25 Bravo. And the mindset at that time was to install and operate and provide, free and clear. So part of the answer to your question, and that's one of the reasons that we're opening the aperture, is to specifically get after just providing a capability. I've already challenged that we don't have customers. So I'm sure I'll get a couple of phone calls about that one. But we provide a capability. And in order to provide that capability, we've got to be thinking about what's next and what's the second and third order effect of the urgency to provide that capability. Do I provide it faster? Going back to FM 7-8, speed versus security is one of the lessons I learned at Fort Benning. And the lesson was, as we were walking through the woods, Lieutenant, you could run through the woods really, really fast and get there, but you won't be secure. Or you can walk through the woods really, really slowly, and you'll be secure, but you might not get there on time. There's a balance. And I think that is an example, along with opening up the aperture, of the different way of thinking about how to own your portion of the network and how to provide that feedback, to think about when you install, what does that mean? I'm going to hand it off to you at a certain point in time, but I've got to be aware that you've got a job to do, and I need not make your job that much more difficult because I'm rushing to failure. Does that make a little bit of sense? So I think that some of what we're going to get back is going to be mindset. I also believe, and I pointed a little bit earlier to the lessons learned folks at Fort Gordon, and you're close by, right? That they're looking at this as well. And I know that I see a couple folks taking notes from the lessons learned organization to feed that back in. And I welcome the thoughts and ideas, especially from a 25 Bravo, who now perhaps is serving in another capacity. You probably know best. What is it that the 25 Bravo could do that it didn't do when you were growing up, that perhaps we need to ask and train to the 25 Bravo today so that we can move forward tomorrow? So you're part of the solution. And I would please ask you, if you don't find the lessons learned folks, or someone doesn't contact you after asking that outstanding question, please contact me. Because that's exactly what we're looking for. And as I mentioned in one of the previous charts, 25 Bravo course review, we're asking the question. And maybe sometimes that's what needs to happen, is you ask the question, and then you get all the great experience that you have to answer that question and not just allow it to linger. Okay? Thank you. Okay. Well, look, thank you very much for spending a little time this morning. I hope that this has been beneficial for you. Definitely your questions to me have been extremely beneficial.